boy, there's the fog of war, and then there's straight up propaganda. There's been a lot of fog of war stuff. There's been a lot of honest, people just trying to figure out what the truth is going on from, minute by minute on the war in Ukraine. But there's been a ton of disinformation, and it seems like almost all of it is coming from the Ukrainian side. The Russians really have been mostly silent throughout this whole thing. They're not saying a whole lot. Russian state media is kind of acting like life is business as usual. This is not big news in Russia. They're not, giving it, 24-hour coverage or anything like that. From what I've heard, the Russian media much more closely covered the Russian intervention in Syria compared to this, this war, which, is a much bigger war for them. It's a much bigger story. It's a, much more important conflict than when Russia intervened in the Syrian civil war. And yet they seem to be keeping pretty quiet. Whereas the Ukrainians, of course, I don't think the Ukrainian government has an option of ignoring this. Ukrainian media has no option of ignoring this, whether it's, state or private run. Every media outlet in Ukraine is talking about the war 24 hours a day. And so it's in that space that we are seeing a lot of BS come out. The first big, I don't know if you want to call it disinformation or just pure propaganda, story was this Ghost of Kiev thing, which was so obviously just made up on its face. I'm disappointed in the accounts that I usually trust to try and sort through and try and, bring forward real information during, crises like this or wars or the builds up to wars, the OSINT, the open source intelligence guys. I saw a ton of them retweeting this Ghost of Kiev story. And, the tweet that I saw, because there were a bunch of tweets about this, it was trending for like a day or two. The one that I saw the most was, it was a guy who quote tweeted a video of a fighter jet just flying overhead in some city. Not exactly clear where. I guess it was saying Kiev. And the guy just said, reports out of Ukraine say that a lone fighter pilot has taken out 6 Russian planes, and they're calling him the Ghost of Kiev, and I'm in fucking awe. It had such a, the tweet was brimming with soy. I really hate to bring that kind of language into a discussion about war and peace and serious matters, but that was just how it read. And it's like, you're such a little bitch, you're so easily impressed that you're, quote, in fucking awe over a story with, like, literally just a story. Not even a story that's been reported anywhere. They haven't really, there was news about it. It's not exactly clear to me where this rumor came from. And if you know even a thing or two, if you've ever heard of any war or anything like that, the idea that in a day one guy shot down 6 planes, it should make you scratch your head a little bit and ask for a little bit of confirmation. Say, you know what? 1, who is this guy? 2, where was he that, he was around 6 Russian planes that he was able to shoot down to? And 3, where are these Russian planes? Where are there 6 Russian planes that this guy shot down? Who even is this guy? How do you know that it's not 6? Let's say you had 6 Russision planes that had fallen out of the sky. How do you know it wasn't 6 different fighter pilots who shot down each one of those planes? What is it? It's just there's a lot of people who are very eager to buy into propaganda, and it's not even all Ukrainian people. It's just, I guess, libs in the West who feel like, who look at this as a proxy war against the Orange Man. And I hate to bring him into this, but that's what this is about for a lot of people on the English-speaking, in the English-speaking world. And I don't read Cyrillic. I don't speak Russian or Ukrainian or any other Slavic language. So I'm stuck reading about this from English language sources. And you know what? If it was just the Ghost of Kiev, and I'm putting that in air quotes, Because remember, we're all supposed to say Kiev. That's the other thing. I mean, people are just the political correctness about the word Kiev, which we all know for our entire lives. It's always been Kiev. Now all of a sudden it's Kiev, and we're all supposed to know that. We're not supposed to ask, like, hey, why is it all of a sudden that we all switched at once? Isn't that a little weird? Doesn't that seem a little inorganic? People still catch themselves typing out Kiev, like I saw Steve Lookner doing. He typed out Kiev and then went, oh my gosh, I have to proofread my tweet, and he went and corrected it and wrote KYIV. Because it's a little thing, but it's a part of the propaganda war. It's saying, well, it's just one way of showing a small bit of support, because apparently KYIV is how the Ukrainian nationalists like to spell the name of the city, and KIEV is how the Russians would spell it, even though neither of them use the Roman alphabet. They use the Cyrillic alphabet, so it's not, neither of them spell it that way. But I guess, it's also the pronunciation, Kiev versus Kiev. But they're all a bunch of, they're so sensitive. It's their fragile patriotism that can, be rocked by people, pronouncing the name of a city differently. But, this is such a stupid thing. I don't want to quite get into it, but I mean, like, Moscow. You go to Russia. I don't believe it's called Moscow. I don't believe it's pronounced Moscow. No, it certainly isn't spelled Moscow. There isn't even a W. It's it's a totally different alphabet. And you can find plenty of city names around the world where it's the same situation, where the name that we in the English-speaking world give to those cities and call them by, and how we spell it, is somewhat abridged from how the locals might call that city or spell it. And I have no interest in giving in to some weird lobbying campaign, from the Ukrainian government to change the way that I pronounce a word. And again, it's a dumb thing, but it's a huge component of the propaganda. It reminds me of, but of course on a much more rapid scale, the way that the Turks, I'm pretty sure it was after they joined NATO, lobbied the Western world to start calling what was Constantinople Istanbul, a Turkish name, even though in the West it's always called Constantinople. I even have some, I've seen old maps, like in my grandparents' house. They have an old world map in a drawer, and it says Constantinople on it. Iran, it said Persia. It is normal in the English-speaking world to have different names for things. Thailand was called Siam. Ethiopia was called Abyssinia. Cape Town. Let's think about Cape Town. Originally, when the Dutch, who founded Cape Town, they called it Kaapstad. And the Afrikaners, of course, still do, because their language is descended from Dutch, very close to Dutch. Are we all supposed to call Cape Town Kaapstad? Johannesburg or Joburg. The J is pronounced like a Y. Should we call it Johannesburg or Johannesburg? I feel so stupid going on about this for so long, but I mean, just really been bothering me. And this isn't the worst of the propaganda. The Ukrainians keep claiming that they shoot down all these Russian planes without evidence. They claim that they shot down not one, but two IL-76 planes, which I mentioned yesterday. They claim they shot down one, but then they claim they shot down another. Again, still with no evidence. Supposedly, those planes can hold up to 150 soldiers. They're claiming now that they've killed 3,500 Russian soldiers. I'm just not seeing it. They're telling us, the Russians, this isn't going as well as Putin planned. It's like, what are you, a mind reader? How do you know what he planned? You think he planned to completely take over an entire country the size of Texas in 2 days? We're on day 3 now. When the U.S. invaded Iraq with 300,000 troops, it took 3 weeks for Baghdad to fall. Ukraine's much bigger than Baghdad. And the Russians are going in with, a little more than 1/10 of the amount of soldiers. This is not shock and awe. I listened a lot this morning to the Durand because they had a guy who was on the ground there. His name was Gonzalo, who is holed up in a hotel in Kiev. He's there on a business trip. I guess he lives in Kharkov or Kharkiv, as we're supposed to call it. Another thing, seems to be a lot of cities that have been renamed. But I want to stay away from that topic. What Gonzalo was saying is that, obviously he had internet access because he was calling into the, I don't know, Streamlabs or whatever they were using. And he seemed to have a stable connection. He said his cell phone still worked. He's been talking to his family home in Kharkov. They still have, their utilities. The Russians haven't bombed like water treatment plants. It's very different from the U.S. invasion of Iraq, where we went in, and I say we as America, I normally never do that, but leaving that aside, the United States went into Iraq, bombed everything. Bombed water treatment plants, bombed all the utilities, cut the phone lines. Everything was destroyed. Bombed the roads, bombed people, shot people in the back who were trying to run away. Well, that was 1991, although they probably did it in 2003 too. But what the Russians are doing in Ukraine, while obviously still brutal, it's a war. Wars are never good. War is a violent thing. People die in wars. It's not quite the same level of war that those of us in America are accustomed to or would expect. It's not Sherman's March to the Sea, which has kind of become the default. That's the standard for American warfare, is destroy everything. Make the women and children suffer. No one is innocent. Punish people for being born in the wrong country, kind of thing. That's typically, the American policy, and that started with the Civil War. The idea was not to defeat the Confederacy; it was to defeat the people of the South and to punish them. That was the policy, of course, for Germany after World War I. It was a policy, for Germany, probably, during World War II, certainly the Japanese, whatever. Hell, look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yet we're being led to believe that what is going on in Ukraine right now is the worst thing since the Holocaust, perhaps worse. And it's simply not. I can't take it from people like Marco Rubio, who always, whenever there's any kind of civil unrest or conflict involving an enemy state of the United States, Marco Rubio's always, he's churning out buckets of propaganda. I was going to use a different word, buckets of something else, from his, out on his Twitter account. I can't take it from him when he's talking about, the depravity of the Russians, these savage Huns, the Chechen hunters. I simply can't take it from warmongers like Rubio, who, not only, support war, but, believes in endless wars that are the worst kind of wars, an endless total war. That's what Marco Rubio wants to inflict on the world. And so, he's the last person who really should be out lambasting the Russians for what they're doing now. Because again, I think what the Russians are doing is bad. But it's not bad compared to what Marco Rubio would like to do to other people. The situation in Ukraine can get a lot worse. And it could be a lot worse. And I think that the reason why it's not worse is probably because the Russians don't feel like they have to push that hard. I don't think that they are that afraid of the Ukrainians. I don't think there's anybody who's disputing that the Russians are waging this war in a somewhat limited manner. They have been said to have only committed, maybe about a third of their troops to this, a third of their military. They're not taking out civilian infrastructure. They're not, they haven't, crippled all the people there. They're not massacring civilians. The conclusion that I draw from that is that they don't feel like they need to. Probably because they feel like they're winning. On night 2, they were engaged in combat with the Ukrainian government in the capital city. I don't think people realize how significant that is. Like I said, it took the U.S. 3 weeks to take Baghdad with 300,000 troops. We're on day 3. Not week 3, day 3. And as Steve Luckner has pointed out on his stream, we have not seen any Russian columns make it to Kiev. It's just small arms fire, it seems. It's, individual guys, like paratroopers maybe, VDV. But, they definitely were there. The shots were heard, and there are images of a Ukrainian truck, all shot up with bullets. Now, potentially, since all the weapons were handed out to all these civilians, it could be that there were gang wars going on. I don't want to rule out that possibility, because I'd imagine that all the gangsters were probably at the front of the line trying to get free AKs, if they didn't already have their own, and even if they did, everyone can use more AKs. So maybe not all the combat that we heard last night was necessarily related to this war. But nevertheless, it does seem, I don't think that there's anyone who disputes that there were Russians in the city and that they were fighting Ukrainian soldiers. So I guess I should wrap this up. Unfortunately, I didn't stay as disciplined in this video as I would have liked. I got off on tangents that weren't valueless, but I really wanted to focus on the propaganda that I've been seeing, on stuff that clearly was false, which I did talk about, but I spent too much time on certain stuff, so I do want to wrap this up probably before the 20-minute mark. Oh God, how could I forget? The Russians they're kicking Russia out of SWIFT. I'm gonna have to talk about that tomorrow, because that deserves its own video. My gosh, now I'm gonna be late to the party. I could have been one of the first people, because that just happened like an hour before I'm recording this. But I don't have time to talk about it in this. I'm 17 and a half minutes in. Most people will not be listening at this point, so it'd be a waste to talk about SWIFT now. So to wrap things up, use common sense when listening to this stuff, when reading about this stuff, and when you hear claims that just don't quite make sense, or even before you get that far, think to yourself when you hear a claim made about this war, does that make sense? Does that seem reasonable? And if the answer is no, which I've answered no to that quite a lot in the last couple days, do a little digging. See if you can find evidence to back up these extraordinary claims. If you can't, it's probably propaganda. And it's understandable from the side of the Ukrainian military why they would want to put out a lot of extraordinary claims and make people feel like they're doing very good, is that you have to keep morale up. Even if you're losing, you'll lose faster if people feel like they're losing. So you need your people to think that they're winning, or else they might just give up and surrender. And so, in the eyes of the authorities, this would be a noble lie. But for those of us on the outside who are not fighting in this war, that doesn't apply. It doesn't matter. So, we don't really have any reason to believe stuff that doesn't sound correct. At this point, I would be surprised if, because the strategy now, I forgot to mention, from the Russians appears to be not to go in and conduct urban warfare and destroy these cities, because I think that Russia does want to preserve them. For what purpose, I don't know, whether that's just for the next regime, if they engage in regime change, or if they plan on annexing them themselves. I think it seems to be the case. Russia does not want to destroy Ukraine. They plan, it seems, to surround the major cities and siege them and just kind of wait for a surrender. And so I don't know if, what cities will begin to, will surrender when, but, at this point, they're closing in on Kiev. I would imagine that the encirclement will definitely be completed, by the end of the week. And at that point, it's a question of how long they can hold out. Yes, there are, I guess I've seen a couple videos of Russians in tanks out of gas on the side of the road. It's embarrassing, but Kiev is close enough to Belarus. The Russians, I think, would have to be grossly incompetent to be able to not maintain a supply line. It seems like it should be fairly easy for them, since they have access to Belarus, to encircle Kiev, keep their troops supplied to do it, and cut off the city and just wait for people to wave the white flag. Once the capital city has fallen, they can try and consolidate power in the rest of the country, and then either hold some kind of, referenda on annexing certain parts of Ukraine, or install some kind of new regime, maybe to govern the whole thing. So either way, once Kiev falls, we should get a better idea of what their plans are for the future. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.